All right, welcome everybody. Today is October 12th. This is the Nephio SIG Automation call. And you can see our agenda for the next several weeks is filling up, but today is the 12th. So we have two things on the agenda. One is Nokia has put together another proposal. So we heard last week from me and from Tal. Nokia has a proposal as well around building blocks and components. And then we hope to discuss starting to nail down some timelines and deliverables for the alpha and for V1. And we'll talk a little bit about how the discussion around that's going. But I guess to start, Wim, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I might share my screen. Yeah, Jean-Marie will start. Wait a minute. Which screen do you see? Wrong screen, probably.
None for the moment. Yeah, we are seeing your video.
All right, that's probably not what we want. Is this better? This better?
It's still no screen sharing.
This one?
It works.
We're not seeing any screen share. Oh,
Really?
there we go.
Yeah,
There we go.
That's slow, yeah. Okay, so I think Jean-Marie will start laying down the beginning of the principles, and then I'll follow up with the example. So Jean-Marie, you take it. Is it big enough, by the way?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Can be a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Oh, wait.
Okay, so basically, more than a proposal on components, or it depends what you call components, more than pure software component, this proposal is based on starting from the very charter of Nephio, that Nephio aims at automating the workloads to be deployed and to be operated on top of cloud infrastructure, and therefore to automate this using intent. The thing that is very important with intent, and that's something that was illustrated by the example of I want a soda in my blue cup rather than go to the fridge, open the fridge, etc., is the separation of concerns between the consumer and the provider. The intent really expressing the consumer view, the consumer concern, and being isolated from how it is provided, and also opening the flexibility to satisfy the intent in many different ways. So this separation of concern is something that is very important, and that to automate workloads, we also need to have those workloads to be able to express their dependencies, their requirements towards the infrastructure that is hosting them and that is satisfying those dependencies using the same paradigm, so using the same consumer-provider concerns. So the very basic building block that we are proposing is something that is very composable, where you have a controller that is consuming an intent expressed as a matter of CR. And by the way, it's a kind of I would say a pure approach. So whether it's one controller consuming multiple CRs that are expressing intent, atomic intents, or one, etc., doesn't really matter. And that's all what is viewed by the consumer. From the provider perspective, there is a controller that can be configured by whatever means, and in that particular example, this is another set of CRs that is more the kind of SRE or service provider concern. And very importantly, the controller can manage its own set of resources. This is the type of output that is represented with the solid lines, but also expressing the requirements, the dependencies it has that needs to be satisfied from the infrastructure as another set of custom resources, and those custom resources being themselves intents and therefore following the same pattern. And that will be illustrated by the example that Wim will run us through. And basically, the essence of that proposal is that what is restructuring and what should be really our focus is the set of intent CRs that are allowing the workloads to express their requirements and to be satisfied by the infrastructure. So Wim, to you for running it to the.
Maybe are there already any questions or not? If not, then I will proceed. If yes, then I will continue. But yeah, probably the example is important before we get questions. I'll do it like this. Then I have it on one screen. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So. Yeah, so basically, what we try to do is illustrate the principle that Jean-Marie explained in an example, and trying to see, okay, how this potentially could work. So before I will I start in the details, by far this is so this is not complete at all. Also, what you see is that where you can run some of these components is flexible, so we can decide where to do that, and also how the information gets propagated. So I think when John presented like using GitOps to propagate between management cluster and workload cluster, what you also see is that some of these things might be propagated directly to the API, because sometimes some of these things might not be, let's say, relevant to propagate through a GitOps type of flow and stuff like that. But let me go into the details so that people understand it better. So the use case or the example here that we are using is someone has decided to schedule a network function on a certain cluster. Okay, so that's the starting point. And he expressed a set of constraints that he needs plus a set of parameters. So by far, we have, I basically put all the parameters here. It's just an example to explain the principle. So someone has that consumer intent. So there is a consumer who basically says, I want the network function. Let's call it a UPF or an SMF or an EMF. And I want a set of constraints, right? Besides that, an operator has basically told the controller, hey, I want to operate this controller with a certain set of parameters. For example, to say, I want only 1 million, a risk of 1 million subscribers on a given instance, or so there can be parameters that are controlled by the provider that will influence the behavior of this controller. Okay. Now, in order to satisfy that intent, what we see typically, I take a UPF example, and we are discussing that typically also in the Slack channels. What you see typically is I need to connect to networks, and I need typically a set of IP interfaces, right? So I typically see, and why we put like the dotted line here, and maybe they are not so right at this level, is these are, you could say, dependencies that this controller has before it can reach its final result to satisfy the intent that that consumer and the provider who is operating it will be satisfied, right? So as a result, what could happen is, let's call interfaces or IP addresses. I need an IP pool for this UPF, and I need that within this cluster or within this cluster based on the constraints that someone scheduled. So what you see here is that this controller asks for a particular intent, which is an IP. So he says, I want a particular IP with, again, a set of parameters, most likely. And because we have different kinds of IP, we have IP pools, we have IP ranges and stuff like that. So we did not go into the details of that as of now. But someone needs to allocate that information, which is a concern of another controller, not integrated here. Because we wanted to, one of the challenges that we typically have today in the current environment, as far as we can see, is that infra and workloads are too much coupled together, and all of that information is somehow put together. Whereas what we believe we can achieve in the Nephio context is that decomposition, and that or putting a set of constraints or concerns in the responsibility of a set of controllers who take care of it and who other people can rely upon. What you also see in the example, which will be better illustrated going forward, but you see here another IPCR and controller. At the end of the day, this probably will be the same, but we use it in a different through a different controller in a different context, right? So you see that these building blocks, if we build them right, can be reusable in order to consume them in various forms and shapes, such that we have composable infrastructure and composable building blocks that are reusable. So in other words, what we are trying to represent here, in order to satisfy the intent that the consumer expresses, we need IP addresses. And that can be multiple, because you can have multiple IP addresses in a UPF for multiple reasons. And that can be, in this case, it's mainly the loopback sides of things that we are expressing, or the pools. Also, you need potentially multiple interfaces to connect to what you call a routing context, or a network of some sort, right? Which is then expressed in one way or another, which is then satisfied through another controller. So this is again the consumer of this controller, which potentially, for example, if the intent says I want a dedicated IP address or a static IP address, you might go to another IP controller, or you might spit out another IPCR, which will be satisfied by a controller. And then this will, if we use motus, so that's why we call this NAD, like the network attachment definition of motus. So this could be a particular implementation, would then be called upon in order to then satisfy that request. And then once that information is resolved, you basically get into the actual, let's say, CRs, and that can be either core or vendor-specific CRs that basically are going to determine the implementation with the set of criteria that has been requested by the user, and then are fulfilled during that propagation. So that's a little bit what we are proposing. What also the color coding that you see here is related to then Nephio in particularly. So we believe that it's of interest of the community to actually have also Nephio focus on these particular, so these are CRs, so these are instances of a CRD at the end of the day, but that Nephio focus on these building blocks in order to help us doing that decomposition between infra and workload, and having us to build that composable infrastructure and workloads. And that's somehow it. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
I think I'm first in the queue. First thing I will say is I love this. This is totally in line with my thinking as well.
I think so, yeah.
I appreciate. I mean, I think that we've all been talking together for a long time, so it's we've informed each other's viewpoints. A couple of points. One is the demo, Stephen's demo that we keep pushing, actually demonstrates some of these pieces. It's not, much like you said, this isn't complete, neither is what he has, and I don't know if he's on the call or not, but
I just came in, sorry.
Well, okay, it does demonstrate some of these, even some of these yellow pieces that you've got. So I think that's good. I had another point. So the other thing that this is in our following discussion after we hear from everybody here. We're talking about kind of trying to figure out. Obviously, V1 is gonna have to be figured out, but we have a more immediate need of sort of our alpha, which is going to be a demo and workshop in November. And one of the things I'm hoping to propose in the next couple of days actually is this sort of use case of the IPAM piece I was putting as a stretch goal. But I would love to be, for exactly the reason I think you're saying, I'd love to be able to show that separation of the infrastructure from the workload and that coordination between those controllers that allocate those. So this looks great to me, I guess is what, is what I have to say.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Tim, I think, is next.
Yeah, so hello. I mean, this paradigm that we explain here, at least the yellow parts, we have already deployed an operator that we wanted to show today, but we moved that to next couple of weeks of the Nephio meeting. And this operator does exactly that. I mean, it's actually an umbrella project above Multus, but does not only coordinate the creation of networks and the configuration of those inside the cluster, but also goes one step further and configures also the fabric. Because right now the problem that we have with our deployments in general is that you need to pre-configure the fabric in order to be able to actually have workloads inside your cluster and have correct connectivity inside the cluster and also outside of the cluster. But the fabric is completely static. So you need, for instance, to create all the VRFs in the DC gateway. You need to open all the VLANs on the fabric, and that is completely static. And then you can deploy your cluster and then start your workloads. So with the in operator that we wanted, we will actually show a demo in the next couple of weeks. We actually take care of all of those parts. So we have a dynamic approach that actually, through custom resources, you can create external networks. This is how we call it, which is our L2 services there, and that means that you can provide dynamically in day one networks for your workloads, and also through L2 service attachments. What you do is you actually bind to those already created external networks. And those L2 service attachments, what actually they do when they get created, the controller, what it does is actually goes inside the cluster and creates the network attachment definitions with all the IP subnet configuration and also the routing that you need inside your workloads. And it also goes to the fabric and opens all the VLAN ports that you need there, maybe. And also in the future, we'll actually create also the VRFs in the disk gateway. That is not supported right now, but there's the design is already there for that, but we missed the implementation for the disk gateway part. So what you have presented here, it actually follows very well the idea that Inno supports, and we are fully behind that, I would say.
Yeah, we have a similar implementation of what you just explained. What we have focused here in the information model really on the version 1. So we said we need a network. So basically this interface here will consume it, right? But yeah, we didn't go there as of now, but we have to ensure, of course, one of the things that we wanted to do as part of Nephio, and at least as part of this SIG, is to focus on this information model, on making these building blocks complete and see which decomposable pieces we need and how they interact. Because I think that's very important, because we can all say we have components, but I think we need to make them work in concert, if you see. And I think what Jean-Marie tried to explain, there's a few simple principles behind. And if we can follow those along the lines, we have this, what we call this decomposable architecture. But what you have seems to be great. Yeah, perfect. I don't see the queue. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Hey, thanks. Thanks, this is great. A nice presentation. So I have one question on the not bound. So you intended two separate CRs, one from the consumer, one from the SRE. Consumer provides the actual intent, and SRE provides the actual constraint. Is what I understand as.
Not all the constraints, so not necessarily all the constraints. For example, this is more the provider concern. So for example, if you are an operator, there can be, you could see multiple incarnations of it. It could be, for example, that you say, here is a lifecycle constraint. I only want, let's say, 10K or 1 million subscribers on a pot or something like that, right? I'm just calling something out. Or there can be other things that are of interest, which typically you don't see being expressed through a consumer intent itself. These are more, you could say, the design rules that an operator or a provider defines for him to operate such an environment.
Got it. Thank you. So I think decomposing into those two makes sense. But at the same time, I'm also thinking the level at which, at least Nephio, we are envisioning it to be operated more as a domain controller. So there will be multiple layers of orchestration above it, including multiple layers of OSS, BSS. So by the time the request comes to Nephio, do you think there's a scope to combine those two into a single CR? So that combines both, because when
so we have to be careful. So the principle that we laid out here and that Jean-Marie explained, you could, so we focused here on a network function instantiation. But if you look to the principle that's behind, you can go all the way up. So but what you don't want to do, I think what is important is we should not try to combine too many things in the same thing. What makes it, what is important is to clearly separate the duties and the duties of concern. Otherwise, what you see is that, and I came from like a consulting thing, but more implementation right now. What you see, your software, and I think that's also true in automation, becomes way more scalable and flexible when you do one thing and one thing very well.
Yeah, I totally understand. We're purely software principles here. I understand that. But my question is slightly different.
Okay.
So this Nephio is going to operate. We are not going to provide the northbound OSS APIs, is what I understand. There'll be multiple levels of OSS, BSS, and orchestration systems on top of it, and we are going to act as a domain controller. So
Correct,
it was in that context, because by the time the request comes to us, multiple layers of OSS would have already processed the consumer request, and it would have realized I have this consumer request and I have these constraints that I need to fulfill as well.
Okay.
So
one piece of clarification. When we say consumer, it's not in the meaning of an end consumer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
So
I'll go back here for the time.
Yes. It's really a matter of perspective. If I am providing a software function and an API, the caller of the API is the consumer. The software function is the provider, and that's true at every level. So that's why when we say consumer provider, that's really at every level, and that can be very much at the level that you are describing, where you have a certain number of systems and functions that have translated your customer request, that is a service order or a product order if you are following the TM forum, methodology, for instance. And yes, it's pretty much very transformed and very iterated when it reaches Nephio. But then those systems are the consumer from Nephio perspective.
Yeah.
And Nephio is the provider from that perspective. And the UPF here, or the network function here, is the consumer of the infrastructure, and is the consumer of the various capabilities of the infrastructure, and et cetera, et cetera. An interface, if you look at the example, the decompose example here, the interface and the controller that is controlling the interface is the consumer of an IP address and of the network attachment description.
Okay.
So in other words, I mean, it's true that Nephio is a domain controller. So we are a consumer. So they basically dictate to us what they want to achieve, and then we implement. That's basically the idea here at the moment. If you want to go further, I think you can go further with this principle, but at the moment, that's the focus of Nephio. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that makes it clear. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to be quick. So this is really great. I'll echo what John said. I think we're definitely aligned on the vision, and I can see a mapping also to my presentation last week about the components, the 4 components that I think we should focus on Nephio. So the controller box at the top, I can kind of see a planter being part of it. You didn't name this controller, but I'll also point out that these controllers could be composed of multiple operators. It doesn't have to be.
Sure.
What is the component? We're not really sure. And then, so I hope my presentation next week will be interesting. Regarding the lower level and what Dim's comment about ENO, right? So that's what I call the even lower level than that, than where your cursor is. That's kind of the Multus manager, right? Or it could be, as you said, it's very similar to the upper level too.
It's here somewhere, I think. Yeah.
So I want to point out some background to what Dim was proposing about ENO. It'll be a very interesting presentation, I promise, in 2 weeks. I was really trying for a year now to find a home for this in the CNCF community. Tried with one work group, it didn't really work out, but I tried to create a kind of task force to solve this issue that I call Multus Part 2, or a higher level manager to manage at scale, all these NADs, right, which is very, very difficult. And I have a direct question for you, Dim. So ENO is its own project, but assuming it could be a contribution to Nephio. Could Nephio be the home for ENO, or what are the plans for ENO moving forward from your perspective? So sorry, this is a question for Dim and not for.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So definitely, could be a home. Definitely Nephio could be a home for ENO, and right now ENO is in a POC state, I will say, and so the main components is that right now it's only supports Multus network attachment definitions, and we have created also a fabric plugin. This is how we call it, that supports a virtual fabric, which is based on OVS right now. So just imagine that you have like 2 VMs that are your Kubernetes nodes, and those VMs are connected to a fabric in the host, and this fabric could be an OVS. So the ENO that actually runs inside the Kubernetes cluster, inside those VMs, has a fabric plugin for that OVS fabric.
Yeah.
Okay, so the components that we have right now is support for Multus network attachment definitions, and also we have support for a virtual OVS fabric through the fabric plugin of ENO. But this is fully extensible. You can add whatever number of fabrics that you want underneath, and you can create a fabric plugin for that. And also when it goes to inside the cluster support, right now we support only Multus nodes, as I said, but we can probably add Danum network attachment definition underneath, or NSM functionality. So it's pretty expandable. Is an overlay wrapper, let's say, above all those stuff. So yes, will be delighted to have it under Nephio.
So I'll bleed a little bit into our next agenda topic, and we can discuss this after this discussion. But it might make sense for our early release in November to include ENO, not necessarily as this is part of Nephio, but just showing how Nephio could work with and solve that kind of problem and connect to it. So something to think about. Next line on the agenda.
Plus, I think we have to first look at the full information model. I think, Tal, right? Is how does it all fit together somehow?
Yeah, because we're all
Yeah,
viewing
because-
Kubernetes
No,
resource,
but
I think it would be
I
very-
raised my hand, but I know, sorry, I'm an operator that needs to try and find a way to make this run in our network. So I agree with Wim. It's the model we need to figure out before. There's probably 25 versions of code that runs on GitHub that trying to do the same thing. And we can try to make them all jump in and be part of Nephio. At the end, it's what are we trying to, as an intent, be able to do, rather than necessarily plug a project into it. Figure
All right.
out what needs to be
Yeah,
done, and then
I
afterwards we figure out which.
Sure, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm trying to make sure that we have time for all items on the agenda. So let's put that for the next item and finish this conversation first. Sorry, I know I kind of pushed it to a different direction, but there's a lot of people on the queue. So go ahead, John, you're next.
Yeah, well, I think Jean-Marie has something specific. Is it specific in response to what was just said, or should I?
Yeah, that's specific in response.
Should it go to the next item, or you just?
What?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, let me just say quickly. From our perspective, what's important is really the CRD definitions. And to have a project qualifying to be a proposal or a good example of the CRDs, those CRDs need to meet our requirements or our definition of intent. And in particular, one of the definitions of intent is to be agnostic from how you actually realize the intent. So I don't know about those particular projects if they meet this, but typically when we say you can have plugins, etc., are they exposing different CR and CRDs? In which case that's not really intent because you are exposing the realization, or are they pluggable under the same CRD? And in that case, yes, that can be a candidate for defining what is that type of CRD.
Yeah. Okay. That's yeah. Thank you. I agree. The point I was going to raise was really to just kind of make a little more concrete some of the things Jean-Marie said earlier, and it was specifically about this intent. So what you just said kind of fills in, dovetails into what I was going to say. In any case, which is when we describe, we've talked about consumers and producers and different layers. The thing that I want to make, that I think has been a pitfall that other systems have fallen into, that we need to be sort of vigilant on holding the line around, is the intent, the terminology of the intent. Meaning, when a consumer is expressing intent, they should be speaking in the requirements they have, not in the implementation details. And this plays exactly into what Jean-Marie was just saying. So here's a really simple example. If you have a network function that takes, that you want to, as part of your overall architecture, you want to say, I need that network function to meet some specific capacity requirements. Let's say, but the capacity requirements then should be expressed in terms of the consumer. So in terms of a consumer, that might be subscribers, I think Vim is one, or maybe it's requests per second, even you can bring it down to that level. But I'm asking this, my architecture says this network function needs to respond in this way. I should not be saying at that level, I need that network function to have 3 gigs of memory and 6 CPUs. If I have to say that, I've already lost the battle, because now everything from the lower levels has to propagate all the way to the top levels, and the top level has to know everything. Instead, I have to be able to do that. So our challenge, our real challenge is going to be maintaining that separation of concerns, maintaining those CRs such that the language is in the right, so such that each side of that consumer producer model is in the right language, and providing mechanisms for managing that. So that's all I want to say. I think Vish is next.
I think Ravi was ahead of me and he dropped out. Ravi, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks, Vish. Yeah. So from an architectural perspective, it will be good to, I think there was comments on OSS, BSS, service orchestrator, and all. So in that perspective, architectural perspective, good to identify these interfaces which are external and which are internal. So because there is an open API kind of contract that is going to be with some external entities like end-to-end orchestrator. So, and the other question I had was, because what I see this is primarily a network function deployment / management kind of a workflow. And since you also said, okay, network function has constraints on placement, dimensioning. So I'm assuming it is going to interact with some other controllers that does cluster management and the cloud infrastructure management.
We focus purely on network function right now, but the principle in general, we just wanted to, let's say, make an example of a principle which is a network function. But the same principle you can apply in actually anything.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, no, because I was referring to John's document where all those topology-based constructs are also in place. So yeah, I'm assuming that this is going to feed into that document, and you're going to have that more kind of a unified kind of a view.
In essence, what we wanted to do, maybe just to clarify, if you look to John's document, we actually basically detailed his UPF class and so on in a bit more detail. I think that's what we have been doing here. So it's very complementary with what John has explained, but we focused on not on the surrounding pieces, but purely on the network function itself. So if you look at the UPF class that John has in his document, it fits. So it tries to go to the next level of that, but not to the full extent yet. But that's where you have to look at it into the big picture from what you have seen or what we have discussed so far.
Okay. No, yes, this seems very generic at this point. I'm assuming that the southbound kind of those demux that you have IP interface would be very different for different kind of network functions, that probably for control plane and for user plane and so on, right?
Well, this building block, in our view, we should build it in such a way that we can reuse it, such that if you have a UPF, you can reuse this building block. Potentially, the requirements that the UPF expresses to him might be different than if it's, you see. So, but this building block for us is one building block that we believe should be reusable in various forms. Also, I put here just one IP CR, so it's an IP CRD. You could say there is various flavors. I need a pool. I need this. I need a dedicated IP address within a certain subnet or something like that. There will be various flavors of that intent expression or that consumer requirement or contract you have to fulfill, right? So there will be various, what we call in Kubernetes, kind of CRDs, so different kinds which have different potential, different requirements, or different classes. So we haven't gone through that level of detail. We just wanted to focus on how to decompose it and how that would look like, just focusing purely on IP and networking, because that has been discussed in the Slack channel quite a bit. So we focus just on that. But you can use that, for example, if you need a cluster, you could say, I have a cluster CR and as a controller who is going to implement the cluster. So the same rules, the same principle apply.
Okay. No, I think
we are trying to do
kind of identify those layers. Like, I mean, you're going for the most kind of least granular to the kind of more granular kind of you're going the southbound. So at least from that layers perspective, that functionality is distinguished. Right? Okay, topology is handled in this layer, constraints are handled, and then you go into the basic networking or accelerator functions or whatnot. Fabric level details and all that.
From our perspective, what we would like to do is focus a little bit on that decomposition and which of these building blocks we need, such that we can then say, okay, these ones we are doing in version 1, these ones we are doing in version 2. Here we have a workaround, like we basically statically define a CR with certain characteristics. And from the moment we have a view on that decomposition, you can then say, okay, we implement A, that B, that C, we do this in version 1, in version 2, or and so on and so forth. That's a little bit what we are trying to do here.
Sure. Could you also clarify, you mentioned about information model. I mean, when you talk information, are you talking about this hierarchy of CRD definitions?
What is in the CRD? So for example, what is in the CRD and what you need to get there? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what does SRE stand for again? I'm sorry. Terminology.
SRE stands for wait a minute.
Site reliability engineering.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I understood.
Like a designer. is the guy that does design and does the
Okay, the operator.
the operation,
Okay, got it.
operation and the design. Yeah, that's why we call it the provider. The provider concern is the guy that operates it, the guy that provides the service.
Got it. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
So rightly so, I think Tal's bringing up time. So Vish, I think we can handle your question, and then we should try to keep it to about 2 minutes, and then move on to the next topic.
Okay, I'll keep it. Hopefully, I'll keep it real quick. So one, definitely I agree with Ravi. In general, for documents or proposals, a terminology document will be awesome. It'll bring us all on the same page, so that way we don't repeatedly ask the same thing and lose time. And second, when look at those ITCRs and interface CRs, are we thinking that there is going to be an infrastructure as a service APIs that will be provided? Because I know we're talking about fabrics and all, right? I think it was Dim being brought up. So are we thinking about like is there an assumption that there will be like an infrastructure as a service API that will actually go out, bring up a server with a certain configuration and stuff? And if those kind of assumptions, if there are any, can also be called out, that'll be good for us to understand the proposals, right? Understand that.
I think that in V1, there's well, it depends on what comes out of NetArch SIG, right? But what we're thinking is that just to limit scope,
yes,
in V1, the assumption is that infrastructure, like clusters themselves, are provisioned out of band. Now, infrastructure, as far as the network configuration and things, is like meaning, like the NADs and stuff is part of the.
Yeah, and basically, if I may add, this model does not make the assumption that to satisfy the intent that is expressed as the intent here, that you need to dynamically create the underlying resources, or that you are just allocating resources that have been created and provisioned on the side. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's the provider concern. That's not the consumer concern.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this question is also to make the assumptions. What are the assumptions about infra, right? Because we always keep going around there and understand the scope. Yeah, I know in this case, I understand.
My mental model is that despite the time it would take to answer, if you're sending me your intent CR via email, and I have an army of people behind it scrambling to do it manually, you will not see the difference.
Okay. So yeah, it'll come back and saying that sorry, your constraint was not met. So sort of will be an error, right? For example, if it
or I have a lot of work to get it done. Yeah.
So the other thing, I know you're talking as constraints. I also call it as deployment requirements too for the NF. And also in some of the cases, the NF vendor will be the one giving those, for a certain functional, for it to work, they're going to make some recommendations, right? For the different operational. So it's more like requirements will be provided that has to be met. And I know, John, you mentioned that, I didn't understand the point. You were saying, if they had to specify the CPUs and the RAMs and all that stuff, you were like trying to make a point there. I was like, hey, without that information, how are you actually going to bring up the right one? Because if you don't actually have an infrastructure.
Right. So that the point is that, yes, that information has to be determined. And it's an output of another process, controller, right? Like, sort of like what's here, either a controller or something else. But yeah,
the controller can spit it out, right? But it doesn't come from here.
Okay.
I think it's what John was trying to say. So it's a combination of things that happen here. It's from here and here, and they can spit out. Here is so much CPU and RAM that I need in order to satisfy these requirements. But you should not say I need 5 gig of RAM or something, or 16 gig of RAM or whatever.
And part of the tricky part. Sorry. Part of the tricky part is making sure that we architect things properly, such that those sort of things are extension points. So they become externalized or content as opposed to being built into the platform. So there's a sort of a distinction between platform and content that I'm trying to keep straight, but I think that will become clear over time as we iterate.
Okay. Yeah, John,
I think I'm almost done. One thing, which is a Nephio SIG automation scope document that everybody should be looking at, because in the conversation that was going on, was like, oh, wait a minute, where is this coming from? If there's not one, is there a plan to have one? that we can all be looking at one?
I think they're working on that. There is a document, but it's not. There's a sort of long list of requirements from all sorts of different people, and then there's a user stories document that Kaushik proposed a while back, but those two haven't been reconciled yet. So I think they're working on that.
Yeah, I mean,
Right,
it's
Vala's
a good
been
time to
trying to say
ask because I think Koshak just updated it last night, so you can take a look. The user story one.
It's public. He uploaded the public.
He updated it yesterday. Yeah.
Okay, he said he shared your Sana. I wasn't sure if he.
Yeah, I think processing that one, we probably will actually have some sort of for SIG automation, this is what we are going to be doing, is what I'm thinking. That there'll be an artifact. So I'm thinking it looks like there's not one at this time from the answer.
Stephen just put something in the chat, so we can take a look at that. I don't think it's like blessed yet by the SIG, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but it's updated. It's not approved, or it's not finalized.
Okay, but Bala has been trying to say something. If you can say something quick, and then we give us a few minutes to talk about the next.
Yeah, just a quick question, John, just for the thought. I really like the way you're putting where the intent does not include the details such as hardware resources required or the type of network required. But my question is, we don't need to discuss this at this point of time. Just think, the CNF vendors traditionally they said that for this CNF to run, I need so much resources. I need minimum 8 gig or 4 CPUs, or it requires SRIO network, things like that. They traditionally express their requirements in that way about the requirements, and how do we marry these two? That along with the concept that we are doing, that's what I wanted to ask. Probably we can discuss it later.
Well, my short answer would be that's why we have vendors here. And not the reason, but that's one expectation we would have of vendors is that as we develop together a model for which that information can be communicated and derived from one level of intent to the next, that those vendors would implement that functionality. So
yeah. Short answer is it's a combination of this and this that will determine the details, but it should not come from here.
Okay, got it. Thank
you. Okay,
Tal,
you
yeah, I'll try. I think this is both our agenda item, John, but we're not going to be able to pick a list in the next 10 minutes. So I suggest that instead of picking a list, we decide how we're going to pick the list. So we do have we already have the agenda being filled up for the next 2 meetings. Next meeting, we're going to have 2 demos, but I think we should probably keep this agenda item alive for every meeting to at least discuss, well, where are we now in terms of aligning on components? And again, I'll point out that we have short-term and long-term in mind, right? So we definitely want to create a list of what Nephio 1.0 will look like in terms of components and what the scope is going to be. But for November, we have a commitment, an important commitment to show the world that Nephio is making progress and that we have something. So I would suggest that for now, we keep our eye on that ball and make sure that we're basically designing a demo, right? An alpha release, we can call it, for in a month from now, right? So, yeah, John, please jump in. Yeah, how do you think we should go ahead doing this?
So this is where it so I'm working. There's a certain level of resources that Google can commit to make this happen. So I'm working internally to line up my proposal of how we're going to make what we're going to do based on those resources I have available. And what I'd like to do is, once I've nailed that down, which I'm hoping will be like this week, I'd hoped to do it last week, but then other things got in the way. Once we've nailed that down, and right now, just to be very high level about it, it's basically what I'm proposing right now is effectively an evolution of the POC that I did, adding in potentially an IPAM piece that as a stretch goal, but that does a real network function, or maybe a couple of real network functions instead of my core DNS thing. And the packaging around that to make it something that people can more easily install and run. It's very limited. But at a high level, that's roughly what I want to propose. That would involve developing the CRDs for probably the UPF. And the problem with UPF is I can't run it on GKE. So it makes it harder to test, and I need a lab gear, right? It just becomes logistically more difficult. But SMF, AMF, I can run on GKE.
Even SMF, no.
Oh no, not SMF either.
Yeah, it's a Multis thing also. Yeah.
So we're trying to so from a that's maybe a SIG release question is like we have some lab resources, but anyway, I'm wandering off. So we're trying to nail down exactly what that will be. I'll propose that in the next couple of days. And what I really want to do is get as much of that material of what we have so far and that progress into GitHub so that we can all contribute. But obviously I have no way of going to any of you and saying, I need your help for this much resource for this month, right? So I can only sort of commit to what our team internally can do. Once we have that proposal, if other people are saying, hey, well, we can do this and we can do this, we can potentially expand the scope of that. But that's how I'm proposing we move forward, I guess is what I'm saying.
So John, my addition to this, I think this is great, and I think we all appreciate that Google is a contributing code. I think it will be great though for November if we show contributions from more than just Google.
I would love that.
So I think, my rough view right now, I hope my planter demo next week will be interesting and could be included. If not. As I said, could be included too. I think if we show components contributions, again, short term, nothing we do right now is final for the 1.0 release. We want to show an example of how Nephio could work, right? So possibly again, the time span is very short, right? We have a month
it's
work.
Like ridiculously short.
Yeah, we would love that, but then everyone needs to be committed to actually make the November, which is a hard deadline. We can't
it's a very, very hard deadline. So I think we just have to work with what we have right now. But I think what we have is actually pretty cool. We have a few things here that are aligned, and I think it won't be hard to stitch them together into something that is presentable, right? Again, with all the caveats that this is very, very new, I think everybody would understand that. But I think that would be a very impressive demo showing contributions from a few components.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Anne?
Hi. So I have a lot of free time right now, and I want to jump in, but the problem is I don't know where to start. It's like
Exactly.
there's so many pieces, and
I
I think given the November, I don't know when in November, given the short, essentially we have 2 to maybe 4 weeks if we're talking mid-November for the LFS. Yeah.
So, exactly. So it's November 15th and 16th. So 15th, I'll do a demo. Stephen and I will do a demo to the entire One Summit. So that's a sort of showcase of not just a lot of people on this call, 45 people on this call, which is wonderful, but it's not just the 45 people on this call or the 100 people who are involved in Nephio, but hopefully I don't know how many thousand or whatever they have registered.
Yep.
The next day, we'll actually do a workshop where I want everybody who's at the workshop to be able to actually install and execute the same demo we did the day before. That's what I'd really like. So it's not just a demo, right? It's actually some code that you can do.
Yep. So what I'm trying to say, sorry, is can we scope it in the next 2 days or the rest of this week so that we can start diving in?
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. I need I had set a hard deadline internally for last Friday, and so here I am failing the first deadline. So I want to have the scope proposal out by the end of this week, and that should include. I would hope that could include places where we can all contribute, not just places where Google's contributing. Like there should be places in there, space in there. So we need to get rubber to the road next week, probably, right? I mean, really, really short on time.
Yeah, I think that's possible, John. I think in terms of just doing a demo, we can show, for example, your code, for example, feeding into Eno, doing something, or feeding into Planter. I think it's possible. I'm optimistic that we can do this. And what I will do is, I think, John, we can add this topic again to, as I said, let's keep this conversation going. So basically, every item in agenda from now on will include planning towards November.
Perfect. Yeah.
Even if it's just 15 minutes. There's a lot to do, everybody. So I think my request for everybody is let's, for the next month, run a tight ship and just be very, very focused. Our conversations sometimes get very broad, and because we have to, we're still trying to figure out this whole project and its scope, especially as Vish, you were saying, we don't have that document for this team exactly. We don't even know exactly how all the parts connect together. But if we iterate, I think that would just come up from our work, just from moving forward. Does that sound good to everybody?
I have one thing, if I may. If I may, there's one practical issue, I think, because I tried to do a PR on the POC right now, and I was not able to do a PR, by the way, so that we have a practical issue, I think. I don't know whether it's only for me.
That would be my problem. So
okay,
I'll take care of it.
So there's one of
we should be able to submit a PR for sure.
Yeah, PR should be able to. Yes. I'm in the middle of organizing the directories. So there's a place for you to park your PLC code. But I would hope that PR is doable. I mean, if you have a problem, let me know.
I'll check again. I'll ping you, Stephen. But I tried this morning and I didn't, and I had no authorization possible or something. I was not possible. And then the second thing is, I mean, if we really go to the POC, would we not focus the meetings of automation on defining the scope and trying to really see what components we need in order to achieve that, so that we can get contribution? Because I have the feeling it's good to have this. I think it's good to have these parallel tracks, to have different approaches and stuff like that. But if you really want to get the goal of a demo in the 15th or 16th of November, the amount of all the parallel thing is good, but it's probably not going to help us get more people focused on that same goal. What I'm trying to say,
we need to do it. We need to do it both offline and in the meetings. And Cal suggested we spend at least 15 minutes in each meeting, but like it needs to be done offline too. Once a week isn't so let's iterate, and if we need, we should give priority to it probably. So if we need to use more of the meeting for it, that's fine. But I think there's also, real value in the other things we're trying to demonstrate. And by the way, I think, Stephen, are you doing your demonstration at the TSC tomorrow?
I haven't seen it on the agenda yet, but then that's where the content's at. He's going to put 30 minutes there.
Yeah, I don't know why it's at the TSC, but okay.
Like, I mean, different audience. I'm not going to like ask for developers to do work, but then it's a different audience.
Right. So we're at the top of the hour. My suggestion is that we use Slack a lot. Don't just wait for the weekly meeting. I mean, the cadence, yes, it's now weekly, which is faster, but we need to move even faster. So Vim, and if you're working on it, just and let's be transparent. We don't have to do messages from direct messages between people. We can really keep it in the SIG Automation group. That way, everybody can chime in and just see that there's progress going on. I think that'll be useful for everybody.
Yes, that would be helpful, I think.
May I jump in really quickly?
Sure.
Can we have ad hoc meeting as needed? So, like if I need to talk to 2-3 people on whatever I'm working on for the PLC, can I propose an ad hoc in this general automation SIG?
I think if you propose it in the general one, then other people, we should try to keep our meetings open so people can.
Yeah. But I could propose, like, for example, a Zoom that say, hey, I'm going to have a Zoom. Hopefully these 2 people and I will talk about this, and anybody else who wants to join can join. Is that okay?
Yeah, post it on Slack, I think. And then
post it on Slack.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.